Ideology. That is what gives evil doing its long-sought justification and gives the evildoer the necessary steadfastness and determination. I used this quote in my previous video on Islam, but it has been ringing in my head ever since I read it. At the suggestion of the good Dr. Peterson, I recently began reading the Gulag Archipelago, which is Alexander Solzhenitsyn's account of his stay in the Gulag prison camps of Soviet Russia and how a well-intentioned political revolution turned into a senseless genocide. I'm not even that deep into the book, and I can already tell it is one of the most important things I will ever read, and it has also struck me with a fear unlike anything I've ever felt before. It's real fear on a grand scale, a scale where millions of people were slaughtered in the name of progress. Not only could I put myself in the shoes of the prisoners who were slid into holding cells just wide enough for you to step into sideways, and then beaten and starved and sleep-deprived, but I could also imagine something like this happening again today, or at least within my lifetime. If history really is doomed to repeat itself, then it's best I learn as much as I can about it. And the key word here is doomed. History is never blessed to repeat itself, and that's mostly because it's filled with tyranny and bloodshed and barbarism and tribalism, and this account is no different. Many of my friends and people I know view the right wing as the threat, as racist warmongers who are just hell-bent on a white supremacist society and want to remove all the rights from women and minorities. But to me, it's the left that presents a much larger threat. They're following in the footsteps of some extremely dangerous individuals and ideologies, and it's all justified under the banner of equality and inclusivity and tolerance. From all I can tell, the right wing is in its death throes. They allowed a madman to seep through the cracks in their system, become president, and now the rest of the party is showing themselves to be rather incompetent. And after all this is said and done, they're going to have to completely restructure themselves. After Trump's election, I really thought the left would take some time to reflect and look at what they did wrong. But they're doing the exact opposite. They're getting more and more absurd with each step they take and clinging tighter and tighter to that absurdity. Sam Harris has called the left irredeemable, and I think that's true, but I don't see them going anywhere. Their ridiculous politics would be funny if they weren't so frightening. And it's political and social tribalism at its worst, and it's a recipe for disaster. Now, like I said, I'm not even that far into the book yet, and there's already a handful of moments that parallel leftist ideology way too close for comfort. Now, I'm not trying to be sensational and say that there's a genocide on the way, but this sort of stuff doesn't just happen overnight. It's a slow process that you might not even notice unless you're actually paying close attention. Laws that by themselves seem rather innocuous, but when stacked on top of each other, create an exclusionary and potentially dangerous environment. Now let's go through these point by point and do what we can to stave off the insane politics of the left. Who among us has not experienced its all-encompassing embrace? In all truth, there is no step, thought, action, or lack of action under the heavens which could not be punished by the heavy hand of Article 58. There was no section in Article 58 which was interpreted as broadly and with so ardent a revolutionary conscience as Section 10. Its definition was propaganda or agitation containing an appeal for the overthrow, subverting, or weakening of the Soviet power, and, equally, the dissemination or preparation or possession of literary materials of similar content. This law was as broad as possible and allowed them to interpret and apply it haphazardly, effectively allowing them to persecute anyone for anything without any actual basis or evidence. Legislation with similarly vague wording is being passed in Canada. C-16 and M-103, both of which I've discussed in previous videos, are extremely indirect and can essentially be applied to any case where someone feels offended. C-16 amended the Human Rights Code to not only include gender pronouns, made-up words, but also to protect gender expression, aka fashion, setting up potential prosecution if you make the wrong comment to the wrong person about how they dress. Oh, for example, like in your attempt to look as non-binary as possible, you now lack any originality or uniqueness and have become a bland, featureless meat sack that resembles a neutral from Futurama. M103 seeks to squash that pesky Islamophobia. Again, a word that has to die. Fear of Islamic doctrine is not unnatural, irrational, nor is it a diagnosable condition. Islamophobia is a catch-all term that allows protection from criticism by labeling that criticism as bigotry, and we now have legislation that is attempting to criminalize that criticism.
This is very urgent business, ladies and gentlemen, I beseech you. Resist it while you still can, and before the right to complain is taken away from you, which will be the next thing. You will be told you can't complain because you're Islamophobic. The term is already being introduced into the culture as if it was an accusation of race hatred, for example, or bigotry, whereas it's only the objection to the preachings of a very extreme and absolutist religion.
On speaking about those who are being arrested, Solzhenitsyn describes just plain, ordinary thinking people and students with particular severity who had not been sufficiently scared away from the West. It was fashionable to charge them with praise of American technology, praise of American democracy, and toteism toward the West. Just plain, ordinary thinking people, those who decided to follow their own thoughts and inclinations instead of those that the state was demanding them to. It's both funny and unsettling here that he labels these students as the free thinkers, when today it's the college campuses that are the most hostile to varying viewpoints. Alternative viewpoints are not even met with discourse, but rather silenced and suppressed as quickly as possible by both students and faculty alike.
Not free speech. No free speech for hate speech. No free speech for hate speech.
College campuses are now intellectual vacuums that are designed for one type of thinking, and if you fall outside of that, you get crushed. It's the exact opposite of what a college campus should be. Another key part in this is the demonization of the praise for the West. It seems that anyone who has anything positive to say about America is now viewed as the opposition, and this strange contempt has grown for the West and Western values. The fact that you even have the luxury to complain shows that you have it so much better than most of the rest of the world. Obviously, we still have problems, of course we do, but god damn are we lucky to have some of the problems we do instead of some of the problems that these other countries are facing. When people get annoyed at millennials, this is what they're talking about. A complete lack of gratitude or appreciation for what has been accomplished just a short time after crawling out of the primitive muck of the past. But now, when you want to build and prosper in this world, why do you persecute your best citizens? They represent your most precious material. After all, believers don't need to be watched. They do not steal, and they do not shirk. Do you think you can build a just society on a foundation of self-serving and envious people? Everything in the country is falling apart. Why do you spit in the hearts of your best people? Separate church and state properly, and do not touch the church. You will not lose a thing thereby. A heavy level of contempt also seems to be aimed at anyone with religious convictions, at least white religious convictions. Now, I'm not here to claim that white Christians are really being oppressed, and I'm not even here to defend the faith in general, but you can't deny that they are the focus of aggression by these self-serving, envious people that Solzhenitsyn describes. For the most part, these religious people can just be ignored and allowed to work their normal jobs and live in their normal houses with their normal families and drink their normal milk and help the economy stay afloat. Obviously, if they try to apply their convictions to the state, we have a problem. But when was the last time you felt genuinely coerced by a Christian who is attempting to condemn or convert you? These are the most non-threatening fucks on the planet. Obviously, all this goes for black Christians too, but they're above the scrutiny because they're black. If all these people were to suddenly disappear, your lights would go out. Your heat would shut off. Your Starbucks would close down, and then you'd have to find some place that has Wi-Fi so you could go on Twitter and complain about how oppressed you are in 140 characters or less. This may be a bit of a stretch, but it seems to me like the contempt is more driven by resentment and some sort of disharmony within themselves. The discontentment in their own lives is more easily outsourced rather than grappled with internally. These people are not your enemies, but rather an enemy you've created to escape the responsibilities you have to yourself. The proofs of guilt were relative, approximate, and the interrogator could find them without leaving the office, basing his conclusions not only on his own intellect, but also his party sensitivity, his moral forces, and on his character. Now this is the line that scares the shit out of me. When proving someone's guilt, hard evidence was not even necessary. And when I say guilt, I don't mean actual crimes like murder and theft. We're talking about 1984-style thought crimes. All that was necessary to proclaim someone's guilt were the interrogator's moral convictions. Think about that. Someone who is deemed morally superior gets to decide someone else's fate. Moral superiority is at the fucking core of the left's identity politics. Whoever virtue signals the loudest wins the grand prize of deciding which of their peers is ethically sound. It's interesting because now admitting guilt, white guilt, places you in the moral elites and allows you to judge the integrity of others. If you don't sympathize thoroughly enough with Black Lives Matter, clearly you don't think Black Lives matter. If you don't concede to all the claims made by feminists, you must not think women deserve equality. You pretty much have to resign yourself to the will of those viewed as oppressed or marginalized, or you yourself will be viewed as an oppressor. It's some creepy fucking shit. Well, guess what? I think it's all bullshit. I don't agree with Black Lives Matter because your movement handles itself poorly, isn't based in fact, and shuts down people who are actually trying to help you.
When Justin Trudeau says that, he is a liar. He is a hypocrite. He is a white supremacist terrorist.
And I don't agree with the women's rights marches or modern feminism because you perpetuate false information like the wage gap. You have charlatans and murderers spearheading your rallies, and you focus less on actual equality and more on tearing down the patriarchy, which is a narrative that you yourselves fabricated. You take every chance to accuse people of racism and misogyny, but you divide everyone along race and gender lines and magnify the otherwise arbitrary differences between people. It's literally judging people by the color of their skin other than by the content of their character. And I don't believe in an infinite number of genders, and I don't believe in an overtly oppressive patriarchy. And if you have an argument other than me just not understanding because I'm a white male, I'm honestly eager to hear it. You guys seriously have your shit completely backwards, and your attempts are misguided at best and deadly at worst. You censor speech you don't like, remove ideas from the political and social arena that clash with your own, forcefully apply your opinions with the use of violence, pass laws that protect your clan and demonize those outside of it, and then have the nerve to turn around and call other people fascists. Terrifyingly enough, fascist is what the political prisoners were called in the Gulag camps. You are fascists in the name of anti-fascism, and your brand of politics has poisoned the well. Any reasonable point you may have had amongst the nonsense is now lost and irredeemable. Others have not yet attained the mature concepts on which a shout of protest to the crowd must be based. Indeed, only a revolutionary has slogans on his lips that are crying to be uttered aloud. Now, I am no revolutionary, and my concepts are far from mature, but I will most certainly shout and protest against this slow and dangerous march. And I would implore anyone who's watching to think for yourself and speak for yourself and act for yourself. Do not be guilted into drinking the Kool-Aid.